All right. And in that case, guys, I say let's get the show right. All right. Well, welcome everybody to week 10. I spoke with someone online a couple of days ago who said they were sort of really interested in the idea of complex dynamic theory that I said, I know nothing about this last week, but that's great because that means that as you're reading through, you're finding things that you guys are interested in. So I am absolutely delighted. All right, so let's get this together. Okay, so today I haven't returned your. I'm getting there, and I will return your proposals over this week so that you can make sure that all is well. This week we're going to look at chapter 12, which, as you read, is full of data. Right? So this part of SLA, what's called the interactionist approach to SLA, is data driven, right, for a large part. So we are going to look at some of this data, and one of the reasons we are is because your last data analysis is going to be input based. So we're going to look at that at the end. But so that's why I had you read this chapter out of sequence with your syllabus, because issues from this chapter are going to be exactly what you're going to use in your third data analysis, okay? All right, so this is the interactionist hypothesis. Is basically input, output, and interaction, or input, interaction, and output, whatever. The formal theories of SLA that we've done that started with UG spent a lot of time with the LAD, right? The language acquisition device, and this special neurology that means that humans are the only people that use language, etc. And then we moved on to alternative internal processes, the ones we did last week. Information processing, a more general, less nativist, but still focused on internal factors. And we also, before that, looked at non-language factors, right, which were the individual differences, essentially, your personality, your aptitude, and so on. So this part here is about the idea of input and interaction, particularly in instructed learning. So if we think of a model like Krashen's, he bases his idea of input on UG, right? He says that if students are allowed to acquire the language as opposed to learn it, that knowledge will become part of their UG and they'll be able to use it successfully in L2, right? What hypothesis was that inside the monitor model? Big hint at the top of the page. Interaction. It's the input hypothesis. That's absolutely right, Diego. Yes, indeed. So as part of his monitor model, Krashen has a hypothesis about input, right? But his idea is if you get the right kind of input, you might remember it was called I+1 input, then you acquire it. So one of the reasons he, for example, pushed really hard on reading, and things like the natural approach and the other approaches he's done to teaching push really hard on reading, is this idea that if the reading is at the right level, if the input is at the right level, the learners will acquire these forms. So since that time, the input hypothesis has gone through some changes. Now, one of the changes is obviously because when we looked at Krashen's model, when you did your midterm, you talked about the fact that one of the problems, the big problem with Krashen is you can't, these are not testable hypotheses, and particularly something like I+1 was a problematic thing to operationalize, right? Because he said, well, it's based on UG, So it's based on the morpheme order hypothesis, but there's only so much morphemes that people have looked at. So there isn't really, you know, much you can do with it. So what's come along afterwards is not only that we need to look at input a different way, but also that's only part of the process. We need to look at output and interaction, okay, which literally is what you would imagine. Output is what you produce, and interaction is you talking with other speakers and listeners, right? So that's what we're going to focus on this chapter. So we're going to start with input, and under UG, input has a pretty limited function, right? If you're a first language speaker, you just have to have enough input to trigger the LAD, right? And that will start all these nativist functions going on, and you learn your language, okay? But for many people, this has seemed like a sort of under-determining what the input might do for L2. So if we go with the fact that we may have no access at all, if UG even exists, we may then have no access at all to it as L2 learners. What is input doing, right? We already know what language is. We already know that you have different tenses and different nouns and different. So what is the input actually doing? So Corder makes a distinction to start with between the distinction between input and intake. So what he says is that you can input all you want, right? But only so much of that will be intake, meaning only so much of that will be part of what's restructuring your system, the thing we talked about last week. So what he said, and this has sort of gone on to that, one of the reasons that we have foreigner talk, for example, is that it facilitates intake. Now, who's heard of caretaker talk or motherese? Yeah, and what are those, Mark?
Well, it's just a very simplified speech where you're going out your way to use forms and expressions that you're certain, presume, that the other person can understand.
Absolutely correct.
You're probably speaking slowly as well.
Yes, good. So this is, motherese and caretaker talk come from L1 acquisition. And motherese used to be the term, but then they got a bit more PC. I realized that there was a lot of kids that weren't being raised necessarily by their mothers. So now we call it caretaker talk. That's why that changed. It's the exact same thing. And it's exactly as Mark says. It's the idea that you might slow things down. We often raise our pitch. Hi, you okay? You want an apple? Yeah? Huh? Anything like that. Anything like intonation, speed, diminutives. It's a little kitty. You see the kitty? Anything like that is sort of part of. Now, we do something similar with foreigner talk. So have either of you heard the term foreigner talk? So essentially it's the same idea, but it's what you do for foreigners. So you start interacting with a foreigner. And let's say I'm interacting with Sheehan, my favorite foreigner. And I say, I start asking him things, and it becomes clear that, at least in my mind, that Sheehan doesn't really understand what I'm. So then I'll back up. Right, and I'll either go slower. I might decide that I'm talking too quickly, or I might decide that the vocabulary I'm using is too complicated, or the syntax. So I might start pigeonizing the language. Pigeonizing the language just means a sort of me, Tarzan, you, Jane kind of approach. You knock everything down to nouns and verbs and keep it nice and simple. So Corder said this wasn't just done because we're nice people. This is actually done somehow in recognition that in the same way that caretaker talk helps prompt L1 acquisition, foreigner talk helps prompt L2 acquisition. So let's have the first look at some of our data, because we've got a lot of data to look at in this one. So you're going to be on 341 and 342. So 341 is foreigner talk, slower rates, high frequency vocabulary, fewer idioms, fewer, simplified syntax and so on. You see that one? Okay, so let's look at the data here. So I'll be the NNS and Diego, you be the NS, okay, in this interview. All right, we're going to do the whole interview, 12.1 and 12.2. You ready?
Yes.
Okay, I'm the NNS, so I'm the non-native speaker. How have increasing food costs changed your eating habits?
Well, we don't eat as much beef as we used to. We eat more chicken and pork and fish, things like that.
Pardon me?
We don't eat as much beef as we used to. We eat more chicken and pork and fish. We don't eat beef very often. We don't have steak like we used to.
There has been a lot of talk lately about additives and preservatives in food. In what ways has this changed your eating habits?
I try to stay away from nitrites.
Pardon me?
From nitrites, like lunch meats and that sort of thing. I don't eat those.
Okay, so in both cases, with the native speaker has backtracked, right? Because in both cases, the non-native speaker has indicated they don't understand. So in what ways has the native speaker tried to facilitate understanding?
Provides context.
Okay. I mean, think about the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So in the first time he said, well, we don't eat as much beef as we used to eat, more chicken, fish like that. And then the second time, what has he added into the second time that is designed to help?
Steak.
Good. So we don't have steak. So he's given a
Example.
synonym. Good. A sample synonym for beef, right? If you don't understand beef, you might understand steak. What else?
He also repeats himself twice.
Good. Something we do a lot, actually. We just repeat ourselves, which is always fascinating to me, because if the problem is that the non-native speaker doesn't understand the structure, we don't eat as much beef as we used to, then we just do that structure all over again. We don't eat as much beef as we used to. But then he adds a simplified version of that, which is we don't eat beef very often. We don't have steak, right? So again, like we used to, but still he's given him more. Okay, and what about the second one?
He gives context to make it clear that nitrites is an ingredient that you find in processed meat.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
If it's not obvious.
Right. Although again, this sort of cracks me up, because a lot of non-native speakers have never heard of the word lunch meat, particularly if they grew up in somewhere that did British English. It's not a word that exists for us. We don't have the word lunch meat, so he's probably no better off. But still, there you go. It was a try, right?
I was looking at nitrites. That's the one.
Right, nitrites. Yeah. Yeah, he would know. I mean, an example of, I didn't know that they're called nitrites. All right, 12.3. Let's have another go at this. I'm going to save you, Mark, for the next one. So, Diego, you're still the NS. How have increasing food costs changed your eating habits?
Well, I don't think it's changed them. I try to adjust.
Pardon me?
I don't think it's changed my eating habits.
Right. Yeah. So then there's that. There's the getting louder version, because maybe they're in fact not only a non-native speaker, but also deaf. which is actually the case with Sal. He's indeed going to. So it might be worth trying with him. But generally speaking, of course, we assume that they have normal hearing. Yeah, so in this case, what have they done? Changed what to what?
He changed the pronoun to the actual noun.
Good. Good. He changed the pronoun to the actual noun so that he could pinpoint if the problem was he couldn't work out what the pronoun went with. Now it goes. So all these are very standard foreigner talk modifications. And the question is, do you think that it makes any difference? And for Corder, he says this is the difference between language input and comprehended language, right? Which is another way of saying language input and language intake, right? So this is one of the ways that we can do it. Although later on he notices, and it's true, there's no claim that comprehended language is automatically then acquired, right? Because these incidents, just as you've seen here, are individual events, right? We can't assume that then it's actually acquired and is restructuring the system like we talked about last week, right? So, but the idea is that if you have enough comprehended input with enough of this kind of help, it will restructure the system. So the focus shifted from input per se, just the idea of input, which is where Cratchit was, to comprehension, right? You could input all you want, but if it's not being comprehended. So Corder was the first one. And then the other thing that people tried to do was measure how much students understood of the input that they're given. And a huge way to do that was grammaticality judgments. And that's exactly what you did in your last data set, okay? So in that last second data set that you did, you were looking at the grammaticality judgments from non-native speakers, right? To try and find out what their system is. And what did we find in general in that data analysis? Anyone remember? Anyone of either of you remember what you said for your second data analysis? Yeah, blocked it out. Okay. Yeah, it's been I take your point. So what you found, and this will remind you, is that semantics was super important, right? That if they had a core tense like the future, and they had a semantic adverb that meant present, they were confused and they decided to go with the semantic adverb. You remember now, Mark? So that's one way in which we can work out what's going on, what's comprehended and what isn't. In other words, it wasn't comprehended that you could have a will be tense and have a now adverb, like Lucy will be in London now. They didn't like that, right? Because the now seemed to impose now, suppose now, and the will be they understood meant in the future, right? So another one, and this is one of my personal favorite, is back channel cues, because they can get the learner into a lot of trouble. I have been in a lot of trouble having conversations in Hungarian where I'm basically just following the face of the person that I'm talking to. So it's like, the Hungarian smile. I'm like, ah. And then they're like, and I'm like, And then off they go with the fairies, and I have no idea what we're talking about. But unfortunately, my back channel cues have suggested that I do know what we're talking about, and if I, then I'm in serious trouble, right? Because at some point the person asked me an actual question and I got nothing here. I don't even know what we're talking about anymore.
That happens in class too.
Don't tell me that. Don't say that. Has this happened to either of you learning a language? Yeah. Yeah. It happened to me so much that I was like, I've got to stop back channeling. I've got to sort of go, huh? I'm sorry, what? Because, then I stood a chance of getting foreigner talk back to me, right? So I could do some kind of comprehended input. So there's a wonderful transcription, which is what I was saving Mark for. So, Mark, you're going to be the non-native speaker in this one.
Oh, I'm non-native?
Yeah, so you get 2, 4, 6, do you see what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
10,
sure,
and
sure.
I start with 1, hello, and then you get 2, then I get 3, you get 4. Got it?
Got it.
All right, so this is a transcript from a phone call, and you'll work out what the phone call is. Okay. Hello.
Hello, could you tell me about the price and size of Sylvania Color TV?
Pardon?
Could you tell me about price and size of Sylvania TV Color?
What did you want? A service call?
17-inch, huh?
What did you want? A service call, or how much to repair a TV?
Yeah, TV Color.
17-inch?
Okay.
That's perfect. Is it portable?
Uh-huh.
What width is it? What's the brand name of the TV?
Sony, please.
We don't work on Sony's.
Or Sylvania.
Sylvania.
Uh-huh.
Oh, Sylvania, okay. That's American made.
Okay.
All right. Portables have to be brought in.
Hmm.
And there's no way I can tell you how much it'll cost until he looks at it. And it's a $12.50 deposit.
Okay.
And if he can fix it, that applies to labor. And if he can't, he keeps the $12.50 for his time and effort. How old of a TV is it? Do you know offhand?
19-inch.
How old of a TV is it? Is it a very old one or only a couple of years old?
Oh, so.
The only thing you can do is bring it in and let him have a look at it and go from there.
New television, please.
Oh, you want to know how much a new television is?
Yeah, I want to buy one television.
Do we want to buy one?
Yeah.
Is it a Sylvania?
Sylvania TV Color.
Well, even if we buy them, we don't give much more than $25 for them. By the time we fix them up and sell them, we can't get more than that. $100 out of them if we put our time and parts in it.
Is it 17-inch?
Well, I don't. Look, the only thing I can tell you to do is you'd have to come to the shop. I'm on the extension at home. The shop's closed.
19-inch? You don't have?
Do we have a 19-inch?
Yeah.
No! I've got a 17-inch new RCA.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye! This has to be my favorite transcript of all time. Yeah. It's a real transcript. Yeah. It's a real transcript. So this is a real transcript that was collected by Veronis and Gass in 1985 during a telephone conversation in which a Spanish speaker called a store to inquire about the price of a TV set. He did not realize that when he looked up the telephone number, he looked up the number for TV repair shops. Hence the what you then get. Wonderful, huh? So what's going on in that? What typically happens, actually? What typically happens when what do people try and do?
Well, there's two things going on.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's many things going on.
Yeah.
But with the main thing going on with the non-native speaker is, like we just mentioned, he's too shy about making it known that he doesn't understand.
Right.
So he's pretending to understand when he doesn't.
Right.
The problem with the native speaker is that he's not very good at foreigner speak.
Right. Right.
And even though it's obvious that the person doesn't speak English or understand English very well, the native speaker is carrying on almost like he would with someone who is a native speaker.
Right. So this is in fact exactly what as native speakers we tend to do. We tend to assume that the non-native speaker knows what they're doing, right? So instead of backtracking and saying, wait, something's wrong with this conversation, right? And we're going to talk about the difference between horizontal and vertical, right? Horizontal conversations are like this one, where you go round and around and around, and typically conversations are vertical. So instead of thinking maybe there's something really wrong, as Mark says, the native speaker just keeps on trucking, right? And then you get the end result is this, which was awesome, is it not? Yeah. So this is a good lesson for any of us that are thinking that we shouldn't just clarify where we're going. Yeah. So this is what I just said, looking at conversations and their structure. So typically conversations go linear or vertical or whatever, basically toward a goal. There might be some things that you misunderstand. You might say, oh, I'm sorry, what did you say, or whatever, but essentially it goes in a linear fashion. If listeners mishear something, there might be a hiccup, but generally you're always moving forward. Well, when we look at non-native speaker conversations with native speakers, many of these have a more, what they call circular quality, right? As misunderstandings are negotiated and repeated. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but there's a model that I'll draw it later. But anyway, the idea is that he has a model that native speaker, you go like that, then there's a little arrow and you go like that. So generally speaking, you're moving. Whereas with the non-native speakers, he goes like that, then there's a little arrow that goes like that, and then you move forward a little bit more. Then there's another little arrow that goes like that, and maybe another one that goes like that. Then you move forward a little bit more, and that's the idea. So now we can look at 347 and 348. Let's have Mark and Diego do this together.
Right.
And this is one of those sort of where you seem to be constantly backtracking. So it's 12.7.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever you're ready, guys.
Oh, I guess I'll be non-native again.
Okay.
You ready?
Right.
There has been a lot of talk lately about additives and preservatives in food.
A lot of talk about what?
There has been a lot of talk lately about additives and preservatives in food.
Now, just a minute. I can hear you. Everything except the important one. You say there's been a lot of talk lately about what?
Additive, and preservative in food.
Could you spell one of those words for me, please?
ADDITIVE.
Just a minute. This is strange to me.
Another word is PRESERV.
Oh, preserves.
Preservative and additive.
Preservatives. Yes. Okay. And what was that? What was that first word I didn't understand?
Okay. In.
Additives.
Okay.
Additives and preservatives.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Right. So that is what we mean by a horizontal conversation as opposed to a vertical one, right? Or non-linear one. We have another one on 12.8. Now this one has a similar kind of idea, but this is between two non-native speakers, one of Japanese and one of Spanish. So as Mark is in fact a non-native speaker of Spanish, we'll have him be Spanish. Diego, you can be Japanese.
And what is your Emma father? Is it maybe?
It's just, what is your father's job?
Oh.
Yeah.
And what is your father's job?
My father now is retired.
Retired?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
But he worked with an institution.
Institution?
Do you know that? The name is something like control of the state.
Ah.
Do you understand, more or less?
State is, what kind of state?
It is,
Michigan State?
no, the all nation.
No. Government?
All the nation. All the nation. Do you know, for example, is the institution of the state of Venezuela? Had to declare her ingress.
English.
No, English, no. Ingress, her ingress.
Ingress.
Ingress, yes. INGRESS, more or less.
Ingress.
Yes. If, for example, when you worked, you had an ingress, you know?
An English.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. If, for example, your husband works, when finished, when in the month his job, his boss paid him something, and your family have some ingress.
Yes. Okay.
More or less okay? And in this institution, take care of all ingress of the company and review the accounts.
Okay. I got it.
Okay, my father worked there, but now he is old.
So what's going on that one? Do we know this Spanish word, ingress? Income means income.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Means income. Yeah. So he's trying to say, I guess he works. He works for a government that maybe an accountancy, maybe a government tax thing or something like that, right? Right. So, but in fact, it's quite interesting that they go as long as they can, as long as they do, because in all the middle bit, what's happening?
One guess or no.
Right, right. But there's no,
No progress.
yeah, there's no progress. Part of it is because the Spanish speaker thinks that ingress must be an English word, right? A cognate. Yeah. So he's fairly certain that you must be able to understand. But what's the Japanese person think he's trying to say? English, right. And why would that make sense if you were a Japanese person?
Phonetic.
Yes, right. You might actually be hearing English instead of. And notice he keeps saying English.
That reminds me of I'll try not to digress too much, but
Yeah.
I had a hilarious dumb foreigner moment. My first night I ever showed up in the Mexican city where I taught. I wanted a map. And I'd never taken Spanish in formal education, but I did take Latin. And I remember that in Latin, it's carta, like as in cartography.
Yeah.
So I go around to all the little tiendas in Campeche asking for a carta. It's a letter in Spanish. It doesn't mean map in Spanish. In Spanish, carta means letter.
Oh.
So here's the idiot gringo going into the stores. Letter! I want a letter, please. Do you have a letter? Later, I finally got a hold of a dictionary, and it's actually mapa. Spanish, for whatever reason, through English, borrowed the Germanic word, so actually their word is mapa.
Which, how would you know that? Everything else
not.
comes from Latin.
I'm just like, well, because most of those simple Latin words didn't change in Spanish.
Right.
Why would it not be cartography?
Oh,
So yeah,
bastards. Fancy doing that to you? Yeah. Can I put that up? They're all looking at you like, what?
go away.
Yeah, go away, go away. Why America guy? Yeah. That's so funny. Yeah, good. Okay, so you get the general idea. So the idea is, in terms of the broader sense of acquisition, that this kind of negotiation is going to move you forward, and without it, you're not going to move forward. So this move away from input to interaction spurred this new area called the interactionist approach, which is in fact Gass and Mackey Mackey wrote the earlier version of this book. So what's important to understand about the interactionist approach is it doesn't just mean it's good to practice speaking, right? It is good to practice talking. But the claim by the interactionists is that it's necessary to acquire the language through negotiation, okay? Language development is actually pushed forward by this interaction, okay? So that's a really significant point, because we can all say, well, we all need to practice with the language, right? Obviously. But what the interactionists here are saying is if you don't do this negotiation and push things forward, then you won't actually acquire it to start with. All right. So they give you another great set of things with different kinds of negotiation of meaning, right? This was, well, with the one we just did with the Japanese and the Spanish. What do you see in terms in there? So if you've got comprehension checks, would be something like, do you know X, or did you understand? So did you see any of those in there? Yes, right? The Spanish guy is constantly saying, you know, right? Okay. So, yeah. Confirmation checks. They give you an example here. Your family have some ingress, and the Japanese speaker says, yes, okay. And the Spanish says, more or less okay, right? So that's a sort of confirmation. In fact, of course, it's not okay at all, but the Japanese speaker has just decided to move on. So this is actually called the let it pass principle in ELF, in English as a lingua franca. So what we know after looking at a lot of English as a lingua franca interactions, that two non-native speakers will let a lot of things go before they start pushing it. They will assume that they can understand it eventually without having to stop all the time. And clarification requests, you see an example on page 351. Research, I don't know the meaning of the word research, right? So the idea is that these confirmation checks, comprehension checks, clarification requests actually are what pushes the comprehended language into intake. Does that make sense? She says, what was that? Does that make sense? Is a comprehension check. That's very good. And of course, you quite rightly go, and I have absolutely no idea whether you understand that at all. Yeah. So,
Oh, I looked it up. That comes from Mundi, world.
Oh, okay. So it's not a German word. It's also Latin. Mundi. Okay.
I wondered what the hell you two were doing. There was a moment where I was sitting talking to you, and both of you were looking at your phones.
So it's actually a Latin word, and they didn't get it through English.
Right. It just came from a different word. So.
Right.
I wouldn't know. I don't know anything about etymology. Can't stand it. But Dr. Tado is thinking of doing a class in etymology. So, yeah, sours. Yeah. He loves it. I can't stand it.
How soon could that be ready?
I guess he's thinking of doing one next year. Yeah. He loves etymology, and I just can't stand it at all. All right, I don't even know why. I can't even tell you why, because ever since I've been teaching linguistics to undergraduate religiously, people love etymology, except for me. Yeah. So I always believe anything anyone says. I know no better. All right. So important thing to remember from this part is that interactionists believe that through the interaction, the input becomes comprehended input, which is the same as intake, and that pushes forward the system. Okay, and without it, the system will not be pushed forward. So it's not just practice of the system, it's actually restructuring the system itself. Okay.